Alexander III of Macedon, known to history as Alexander the Great, was born in 356 BCE in the ancient city of Pella, Macedonia. He was the son of King Philip II, a brilliant strategist who united the Greek city-states, and Queen Olympias, whose lineage traced back to the gods of Epirus. From an early age, Alexander showed exceptional intelligence and ambition. His father chose none other than Aristotle, the greatest philosopher of the age, to be his personal tutor. Under Aristotle's guidance, Alexander learned philosophy, politics, science, and the art of leadership, lessons that would later shape the fate of empires. Physically, he was distinct. One of his eyes was deep brown, the other piercing blue, a rare condition called heterochromia, which added to his mystique and presence. At 20 years old, after the assassination of his father, Alexander ascended the throne of Macedonia. Many doubted a young ruler could hold an empire together. Yet, within a decade, he conquered the Persian Achaemenid Empire, the greatest power of his time. By the age of 30, Alexander's empire stretched from Greece to Egypt, across Persia to the frontiers of India. Yet his ambition was not merely conquest. Alexander dreamed of uniting East and West, of forging a single world empire where cultures and peoples could coexist under one rule. His campaign into Central Asia was not just a march of armies, but a collision of civilizations, a turning point that forever altered the course of history. After subduing Persia, Alexander turned his gaze to the empire's northeastern frontier, the lands of Bactria and Sogdiana, regions that had not yet bowed to Macedonian power. These territories, protected by their own rulers, Spitamenes, Oxyartes, and Khwarezm of Khwarezm, stood as the last stronghold of independence. For Alexander, Central Asia was the strategic gateway to India, the key to his vision of a global empire. And beyond the deserts and mountains of Sogdiana lay one of the world's oldest crossroads, the heart of the Silk Road, where trade, knowledge, and cultures had intertwined for centuries. 329 BC. The Persian Empire had fallen. Alexander now turned his gaze toward the heart of Asia, Central Asia, the next chapter of his destiny. From the marble halls of Pella, a young king looked east, toward lands unmarked on any Greek map. What began as a campaign for glory soon became something far greater. Beyond Persia lay Bactria, today's northern Afghanistan and southern Uzbekistan, a harsh land of mountains and rebellion. Through its frozen passes, his army carved paths through rock and snow, battling not only men, but the earth itself. And beyond Bactria rose Sogdiana, the land of fortresses and fierce resistance, stretching across modern Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. Here, Alexander met warriors who refused to bow, cities that clung to freedom, and leaders like Spitamenes, whose courage turned conquest into legend. At last, beyond the mountains, stood Marakanda, known today as Samarkand, the heart of Sogdiana and the crossroads of the Silk Road. Here, cultures and caravans had converged for centuries, and for the first time, Alexander saw not an empire to crush, but a world waiting to be united. His march east was not the end of war. It was the beginning of a dream that would outlive him. The plains of Sogdiana shook beneath the march of Macedon. Alexander rode at the front, bronze armor blazing under the sun, his army advancing toward Marakanda, the heart of Sogdiana. From the city walls, war drums thundered. Archers took aim. Siege towers rolled forward, and the air turned to fire and dust. The clash of two worlds had begun. Sogdian warriors charged from the gates with curved swords. The Macedonian phalanx met them in perfect formation. Spears struck, shields broke, men fell. Dust and blood mingling under the white heat. The horns of Macedonia sounded across the field. The defenders withdrew behind their walls, but the spirit of Sogdiana, fierce, unbroken, still burned within the smoke. The gates of Maracanda stood open. Smoke drifted through the streets as Alexander's army entered the fallen city. Victors in name, yet uneasy in silence. But in the mountains of Sogdiana, the war was far from over. Under the moonlight of the Zarafshan Valley, Spitamenes, the noble Sogdian commander, raised his sword to the sky. He had lost his city, but not his will. At dawn, Macedonian columns moved through a narrow valley, unaware of the trap above. A single signal broke the silence. Arrows rained down. The valley exploded in fire and dust. Sogdiana had risen again. By nightfall, Macedonian camps burned. Flames tore through the outposts near Maracanda. Towers collapsed, men fled, and in the glow of the fire stood Spitamenes, shouting commands in his mother tongue. Victory was his, but its light carried sorrow. When the news reached Alexander's camp, the messenger barely spoke.
Sogdiana burns! Spitamenes! Spitamenes!
At dawn, Alexander rode through the ashes of the rebellion. He looked upon the ruins not with triumph, but with anger and doubt. The conqueror had taken the city, but the land refused to kneel. That night, alone upon the city walls, he stared toward the east, toward India, where destiny still waited. Below him, Maracanda smoldered, half in ashes, half in light. The dream of empire endured, but at a price only kings can bear. In Sogdiana, today's Samarkand, Jizak, and Fergana, a great uprising had begun, led by the warrior Spitamenes. Among the Sogdian nobles, one stood above the rest, Oxyart, ruler of the mountain fortress known in ancient times as the Rock of Sogdiana, perched high in the Peropamizos Mountains, now called the Hisar Range. Oxyart stood allied with Spitamenes, fighting not for power, but for the freedom of their land. When Alexander captured Maracanda, Spitamen fled into the desert, but Oxyart withdrew with his family into the mountain stronghold. Alexander understood. If Oxyart could be won, the land itself would find peace. So he came not as a conqueror, but as a guest. No siege, no blood, only diplomacy. Before the walls of the Rock of Sogdiana, Alexander requested a meeting. That meeting would change the course of history. Inside the stone hall, two worlds stood face to face, the Macedonian king and the Sogdian ruler. Alexander's words carried no threat, only reason. He sought not surrender, but unity. Oxyart, moved by this restraint, accepted peace. And there, in that moment of truce, Alexander saw Roxana, the daughter of Oxyart. Radiant, calm, fearless. Their eyes met, and for an instant, war gave way to destiny. Days later in Bactria, in today's northern Afghanistan, Alexander bowed before Oxyart, uniting Macedonia and Sogdiana not through conquest, but through honor. From rebellion rose an empire, forged not in blood, but in understanding. For 2 years, Alexander pursued the Sogdian commander Spitamenes across the burning lands of Sogdiana and Bactria, the far eastern frontiers of the former Persian Empire. No fortress, no army could hold him. He fought a desert war, swift strikes, faster retreats. His ambushes exhausted Macedon's strength and delayed Alexander's campaign toward India. Doubt began to grow. Would the dream of empire ever reach the east? To end the rebellion once and for all, Alexander launched his final assault across the plains of Sogdiana, near the Polytometus River, now the Zarafshan Valley. The scorched earth trembled beneath marching phalanxes. Sogdian riders waited on the ridges, their turquoise and gold banners rippling in the heat. The steppe held its breath. High above the valley, Spitamenes stood upon the rocks, his cloak whipping in the wind, his eyes fixed on the chaos below. He fought not for conquest, but for freedom. The last flame of Sogdiana. Bronze clashed with bronze. Arrows screamed. The desert thundered with the sound of war. But the end came not in battle, but in betrayal. In the cold northern plains, around a dying fire, the Massagetae allies sat in silence, fear and doubt heavy in the air. That night, the hero who defied an empire was not struck down by his enemies, but stabbed in the back by his own men. They killed him where he stood. At dawn, Macedonian scouts rode into Alexander's camp. They carried a covered bundle. When it was unwrapped, the severed head of Spitamenes lay before the king. The camp fell silent. Alexander lowered his gaze and said quietly, "Bury him as a warrior." Thus ended the rebellion of Sogdiana. The war was over, but the legend of Spitamenes lived on, carried by the wind across the empire that could never break him. After Spitamenes' death, Alexander ended the remaining uprisings, restored political stability across the region, and strengthened Bactria and the northern frontiers, integrating the northern territories into the Greco-Macedonian Empire. After the Sogdian revolt was suppressed, Alexander finally considered the rear of his empire secure. He then planned his campaign toward the valley of the Indus River. His goal was to conquer India and reach the farthest eastern edge of the known world. However, one great kingdom still lay in his path: Khwarezm, known to the Greeks as Khwarezmia, which corresponds to the territory of modern-day Khiva and the Khwarezm region of Uzbekistan. There ruled King Khwarezm, the ancient monarch of Khwarezm, who lived and reigned in the late 4th and early 3rd centuries BCE, approximately 330 to 320 BCE. At that time, he governed an independent state situated between Sogdiana, Bactria, and Khwarezm, covering the northwestern part of present-day Central Asia, including the Khwarezm Oasis, Amu Darya Delta, western Uzbekistan, Karakalpakstan, northern Turkmenistan, and parts of southern Kazakhstan. At dawn, mist rose above the river as soldiers crossed on wooden rafts and horseback. As Alexander entered the water, the wind howled fiercely across the Oxus. On the far bank, riders in fur-lined cloaks watched in silence. They were scouts of King Khwarezm of Khwarezm. For 2 long years, Alexander had fought in Sogdiana, against Spitamenes, Oxyartes, and the nomadic Saka and Massagetae tribes. His army suffered through bitter winters and scorching summers. At that time, Khwarezm was an independent and powerful state along the lower Amu Darya. Its cavalry was nearly equal in strength to Alexander's own. Alexander's ultimate goal was India. A northern war with Khwarezm would have been a costly mistake. Thus, King Khwarezm chose diplomacy over battle. He sent envoys bearing gifts and messages of respect, but this was not submission. It was a warning through diplomacy. Through his messengers, Khwarezm declared, "Alexander, your path lies toward India. There is no game for you here. We do not seek war, but Khwarezm shall remain independent. Continue your journey, and if you need aid, we will stand ready." It was a statement of strength and pride, a reflection of Khwarezm's political wisdom. Alexander listened in silence. Then he placed his hand over his chest and replied with respect, "Tell your king, Alexander values wise allies more than conquered lands." That moment reshaped the history of the steppe. Two empires, Macedon and Khwarezm, were joined not by blood, but by wisdom. Gifts were exchanged: golden cups, silken banners, and a bronze shield engraved with the Macedonian sun. As the sun set over the Oxus, its waters glowed like molten gold, a witness not to war but to diplomacy. Yet Alexander's gaze turned further east. On his map, a new route stretched beyond the Oxus, across the Hindu Kush mountains and into the valleys of the Indus. Standing atop a ridge, he looked eastward and said to his generals, "Beyond those mountains lies destiny." And so began the final march, the road to India, the edge of the known world, and the last chapter of Alexander's dream.